Hello and welcome to the David and David on Real Estate podcast. We are on episode number 125, and we have Stephen Whiting from Street Text coming back to us. Very unique situation where Stephen's actually located in the United States. He knows a lot of people in the real estate industry, and he has a pulse on really what's happening down there. And as we all know, there's a big lawsuit being brought against the National Association of Realtors. And this lawsuit has been won, and there's a big settlement on the table, and there's going to be a lot of changes happening to the industry as a result of that lawsuit. We know that there's a similar lawsuit in Canada, and it's still going through a court system. But Stephen, wanted to get your viewpoints. I know you've had a couple really influential conversations about with some of the stakeholders about what some of those changes are and what we can expect coming down the pipeline in our industry. So welcome back to the podcast, and we really want to hear your opinion on this.
Well, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. And actually, just a couple notes. First and foremost, these are just my ideas. Like I have no idea what's going to happen. Just preface that, but these are just conversations, and hopefully it'll be useful as you're moving forward. And just one quick note: we actually are in Canada, but we just have so many clients in the U.S. and so we have a lot of partners we work with in the U.S. So, you know, uh, British Columbia is home for the business, but we do a lot of business in the U.S. So yeah, just a quick thing, which I know I know you've actually talked about in your podcast in the past, and something everybody's familiar with these big lawsuits. So I guess these are just some ideas. This even comes from a conversation I had last night, and some things to just kind of keep in mind or consider in the future. So, the big change would be from obviously the buyer commission side if it becomes decoupled from the listing side. So in other words, in the future you could have a scenario. There's a lot of scenarios that actually could happen, but there could be a scenario in the future where when you sign a listing agreement, there's no commission paid out to the buyer, or if there is, it will be completely undisclosed, and so it'll be unknown to the buyer side. But what most likely will happen in the future, and again, this is just my understanding, is that buyer agents themselves will have to negotiate with their clients. They will do in a buyer's agreement, which isn't new to the industry, but it is new in the fact that now the buyer will pay for it out of pocket versus it being written into the deal. And I mean, I don't want to go into like more like why this is and whatnot, because you guys have done a good job of covering that. And I think there's others that are much more experienced in that. These are just some ideas that potentially could happen. And so where I think that'll could get challenging, obviously, is it adds a whole nother level of, difficulty. Like if you've got a new client, you now need to convince them why they should pay you X amount of dollars when the consumer side is so good that a lot of consumers kind of know already what they want to buy by the time they're sending it to the agent. I mean, that can happen, right? Look, where, you know, husband and wife are looking for a property. They're doing a lot of shopping, and but it's the same in Canada, but they're on Zillow or some other tool. They find what they want. They send it to an agent, but then the agent says to them, well, I'll open the door for you, but I want to make sure that you sign this agreement that you'll pay me $18,000 out of pocket or $20,000 when the deal closes. And then the consumer goes, wow, but I found the property, right? So you begin to see where some of this tension could begin to show up just because it's not as streamlined. And so again, these are just thoughts. Nothing can happen, but there are definitely big waves taking place that I think are going to echo throughout the industry. And so I think the structures that have been out there, like the team environment, it could get more challenging too, because team leaders they have a whole lot of listings, and then they have all these incredible agents, and then they give the buyer side to a lot of these agents. But now they're going to have to rely on the buyer agent creating this buyer contract. And again, that can just be a little bit more hard and complicated. So anyways, with all of that being said, here's some of the things that I think about, for the future, just what you'd want to start to think about and do maybe a little bit differently. So I think the concept of buying leads could get harder, especially on the buyer side, because you will want to make sure that you're really focusing obviously on the seller or the listing side. but this is back to where, and we've been saying this for a long time. What you really want to own is the database. You really want to have that influence in your market, because if you've got a large database, and you're in control of that, you will be able to ride this out. In fact, if there's pain in the market, you will do better because there'll be even less competition. And so I think going forward, you're just really going to want to make sure that you really put your marketing hat on, and you do everything you can to expand your marketing and your database, just so that you can kind of handle some of those changes as they come out. So I don't mean to I don't want to, I kind of want to open it to the two of you just for a quick moment before I go any further, just to get your thoughts on it. Like, what do you guys think might happen, or in those scenarios, what might happen? And then we can kind of talk about some other ways to get in front of it.
Corman, you want to go first?
Yeah, no, I just, we talk about all the time about, the role of a buyer's agent, and it goes way beyond finding the property. Like everybody these days is, you're in the market for property. Everybody's at home doing some poking around on the computer. There's also, if you've never bought a home before, or if you're buying your 10th home, you're going to be doing some stuff before you even talk to an agent. So I think that's sort of a given. But the agent's role goes way beyond that. Let's say they find the perfect home they want to live in. I think there's still an important role for the buyer's agent. They still have to negotiate the deal. They still have to draft the agreement purchase sale. They still got to see what other competing offers there are. And there's just all kinds of things that come in, and make sure they've got a proper inspector, make sure they got proper financing, make sure they've already retained my law firm to act for them. Like there's a lot of roles that a good agent still plays. So an agent's still going to earn their money. It's a question of working out, okay, before it was coming from the seller's side, now they're going to be paid differently, but does that come off the purchase price that they're going to be paying, right? Because you don't want to feel like, well, it didn't bring the price down at all, and now I got to pay I got to pay my agent. So that's where a buyer, I think, is really going to be concerned. Like if you can tell them it's going to be the same cost if we were on the old system or the new system, you're buying a house for the same price. It's just a question of who's actually giving the money to the agents. But your overall cost should be the same.
Yeah,
That's sort of how I look at it.
Stephen, I think you definitely have a point where if the money is coming directly out of the person's pocket, I think there's more of a thought process about questioning, is the value there, right? I come from Poland, and the way we trade and the way agency works in Poland is that the buyer pays the real estate commission, and I can tell you that's a very broken system. It's not an organized real estate system like we have here in North America. It's very fragmented. There's not a lot of cooperation. Um, there's virtually no cooperation. Um, and it's a difficult system. It's difficult to convince buyers to pay real estate commissions in Poland. And that's the way the system works. So I, knowing that system very well and having seen that system function, um, I'm not really happy about some of these changes
Mm-hmm.
because of the value of our organized real estate system. And I think, the co-op commission 2.5% is a lot of money, no doubt. But I think what consumers and the regulators and the industry, what they have to realize is that our organized way of transferring real estate impacts the value of properties and builds and drives wealth through real estate. The hard work that realtors do adds to the value of properties, right? It's just like putting in a nice deck or putting in, or painting or changing your kitchen. Realtors add value to real estate more so than the commission that they charge. And I think our system, HGTV, the fact that Canadians and Americans are so tied to their home, the fact that we look at real estate as such an important means of, living that American dream and having opportunity. I was at a conference yesterday, and somebody actually argued that the difference between a developed and an undeveloped country, being part of the G7 or not being part of the G7, is access to funds through your primary residence. What does that enable you to do if you have those access to funds, right? And realtors are such an integral part of that conversation that I think, we're missing the ball of only looking at the commission and saying, $18,000 to open a door is there's a disconnect there. Where is there a disconnect? I'll give you guys an analogy. I remember reading this book, and there was this big tanker with this huge diesel engine that was broken. And they called in like 1,000 different mechanics. Mechanics looked high and low and could not figure out what was wrong with this engine, to the point where their company was ready to scrap the whole boat. Like, it's just a big pile of garbage. Can't get this thing to work. Finally, called this one mechanic. The mechanic came in with this little wooden hammer, tapped the engine, and the engine started, and the boat ran. And then the mechanic gave, like a invoice for $100,000 to the boat owner. And the boat owner looks at the invoice and says, "My goodness, you just tapped the damn engine with the hammer. What do you mean you want me to pay you a six-figure invoice?" And the mechanic looked and said, "Well, listen, that's the accumulation of my experience over the last 45 years that got that boat working." And I think, that's the lens that we have to look at our organized system of real estate, of what is it doing to help the average person, the average Canadian, the average American, to build wealth, to live a good lifestyle, to be proud of the home that they're in, to use that home to buy cottages, to buy cars, to start businesses, and to live a better life. And do we want to shake the very foundation of that system?
Well said. And I actually agree with both your points, David Corman, as well, like in the sense of, some of the solution and your points on the fact that the co-op thing, it makes it work really well. It is a smooth system compared to like you're describing in Poland and Europe. A lot of Europe's a lot like that too. And so I actually agree with both of those points. And I agree with you in the sense of, like the value is there. I think the challenge for the real estate agent, though, is the perception to the consumer. And it's going to be, like everything you described and you said is well said. The challenge is, and all realtors would applaud you for it. But the media and the lawsuits and everything, the pressure is going to be like the consumer will feel otherwise. And it'll just be, it's an uphill battle. And so I think that it is going to become a more fragmented system, because I don't know if you can stop that. I don't know if you can stop I mean, if you could, obviously if regulators decide that, no, this is a fluid system, we're happy with it, we'll make minor tweaks to it, but let's keep this working because it's, as long as it's all negotiable and it's, and they kind of hit all the check marks. But there's a lot of big law companies that are going to be pushing for this. There's a lot of money on the table. And I think the easiest way is to get the consumers upset and frustrated with the current process. And it's going to be a hard tide to stop. So I think that's kind of where I look at it and go, well, let's hope nothing changes dramatically. Let's hope the value of the agent is still intact and that's the sentiment. But if it isn't, how will the agent then prepare? Because I think there's a huge opportunity for those that do, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, David, is to like the value's there. It's the same thing. It's just it's going to be structured differently. So we're just going to make sure that it's thought out ahead of time so you're ahead of it.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to explain your value to your client a little more aggressively than you probably do currently. And exactly, how you're adding value and all the different things that you're doing in the process, even if they're doing some of their own homework beforehand. Because you may have dragged them around to 10 different properties before they found their dream home, but they didn't know that that was their dream home without going through the other 9 first. And so maybe the negotiation on the dream home ends up being really simple. And the agent didn't have to pay a big role in that, but there was still a lot of value in the process along the way. So I think as a buyer, you might have to create, just a different type of sell job. I hate using that word, to just explain the value that you're adding to anybody that's using your services and to justify your existence. But I think once you do that and you create the right system and right explanations for showing how all the different ways you're adding value, everybody will get used to that and it'll become a norm again.
Yeah, I always say this, I'm going to keep saying it. I'm very thankful and very fortunate and humbled to have achieved what I have achieved. And, all of it is thanks to our organized system of real estate. So I feel very protective, but I also look at it from the point of a consumer, right? And um, I think we're going down a path that once we go down, it's really hard to come back from. The states kind of went down this path when they decentralized realtor.com. And it's more fragmented. And
Hmm.
that's not always the best for the consumer. But like Stephen alluded to, we've started something that's really hard to stop now, and we're gonna have to go through the motions. But I think we're gonna have to go through the motions um, in a very open, transparent way, where we realize, what are we really walking away from? Because we're walking away from a lot. And we've taken the first step, but I think as an industry, I want everybody to realize, what that really looks like.
Yeah, again, I think well said. I think there's a lot of examples out there of like this, the system actually really does work well here. And if you look at other models, it is more fragmented and broken. So I completely agree. And again, I just want to iterate a couple more things, which is obviously this is a big conversation, one that is hard to determine what will happen. I am by far no means an expert in it. It is just, when you look ahead, you think, if this happens, it's always good to look at like a potentially big market change, because then you just need to think like how as an agent you'll be protected, or how would you still grow through this time. And I would say for anybody listening to this too, in any difficult situation, for those that want to, there is huge opportunity in it. There's opportunity to really get that value out, like, David, you alluded to as well, and explain why I think the education component might be better or might be more important, but there's a lot of ways to do that. And there's a lot of ways to really add that value and really like reinforce it. And I think from a marketing standpoint, brand will probably be very, very important. Like there's many, I think there's many opportunities in it, but yeah, if it goes down that path, but it will be a very different system. So there'll have to be some jigging and changing and modification.
Well, the good news is you'll be able to use AI and the automation that's available to help you resell the value of your services in the future
That's
in a
right.
different way. So you're not starting from scratch. You're not doing it all by yourself. You've got great tools available for you.
Yeah.
How's
David,
that for putting a bow on it?
I love that you're looking at it from a glass full perspective.
Well, but that's a good point, because I think what you're saying is that if certain things change, there's other efficiencies. Like if you're going to lose potentially, there's some revenue loss here. There's efficiencies to also be gained here, and so I do like where you're positioning that, because if you leverage those tools and those things, it might look a little different, but it could still be a very successful business and platform.
I think the end of the day, when the buyers sit down and write out directly or through AI all the value they're adding, the end result might be, you know what? It's not worth 2.5%. It's worth 3% because we're really doing a lot that people aren't paying attention to. So I don't get it. I'm never afraid of those type of changes. I think there's value to what the agents do in the industry, and I think there'll be continuing value. There'll be some changes, but I think they deserve to be paid, and they will get paid.
Thank you, David.
Mhm.
Well, Stephen, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for delving into difficult conversations. But I think it's better to stay informed and know what's going on and know how you have to pivot to be able to really drive more value, because that's what it really comes down to, is driving
Mhm.
more value to the consumer at the end of the day.
100%.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us again. This is a great podcast, and we look forward to having you on future episodes as well.
Thank you, David and David. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much
Thanks,
for your
Stephen.
time.